Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections, and this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. Today, I get to go back to some of my favorite podcast interviewees and chat with them a little bit about a new study that has just come out. You may know who they are, but I'm going to let them just introduce themselves and maybe just give us a sense of what this study was and where it was going and that type of thing. And then from there, we're just going to go like crazy into, I have way too many questions for 30 minutes. So we'll see how we do as we go along. So why don't we start with Lindsay and let you just sort of take it away and, pass it over to Rick when you think it's time for him to talk, if you really think he should, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So my name is Lindsay Callaway, and I'm a researcher with the Center for Research on Church and Faith with the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. And we just conducted a study on faith formation at home. So we had a group of organizations that came around the question, what are parents doing to pass their faith to their children at home? And there were lots of organizations who were interested. I was also personally interested. I have 3 children of my own, 5, 4, and 1, and my son actually just lost his first tooth this morning.
Whoa.
So coming at it as a parent, as a researcher, as a Christian, lots of reasons why this is an important study and research to happen and good questions to ask. So I'll let Rick introduce himself and a little bit more about the study.
You can risk yourself, Rick, if you'd like to.
Yeah.
I'm Rick Heimstra. I'm a researcher here at the Evangelical Fellowship as well. And together, Lindsay and I were the researchers on this project. And I have 4 kids. Oldest is 22. Youngest is 16, turned 16 yesterday.
Whoa. Well, you may or may not know, I have 6 kids. The youngest of whom, I'm going to say close to 22, 23, and the oldest of whom will turn 39 this year. So I've had fun and gone through the whole question of faith formation, as I was mentioning to you, both of you before. It is an interesting question to sort of deal with what that's all about. So I'm going to turn this over to both of you. Let's start with you, Rick, and just say, out of this study on faith formation and passing it on as parents, what struck you as the greatest, first the greatest thing that you heard people saying, and then the greatest challenge that you sense, particularly parents, are coming up against?
Sure. Maybe just before I do that, I'll just back up and talk about what we mean when we talk about faith formation and passing.
That would be great.
Our kids. So in some sense, when we become a Christian, nobody knows our hearts except God. But as researchers, we need sort of a way to know, was faith passed on? And what we typically will do is we will say, are the beliefs and behaviors of parents replicated in their kids?
Oh, okay.
And so in our study, that's some of the measures that we used. We looked at if mom and dad read their Bible, do their kids read their Bible? How often do they read their Bible? Do they pray? Do they sing worship songs? Do they attend church? Those kinds of things. So just a little bit about our study. This study took about 3 years to complete. We did a literature review. We talked with ministry experts. These are academics, pastors with family ministry responsibilities, subject matter experts. And then we did a round of interviews with parents. So these are evangelical parents with children under the age of 18 in the home. And then we did 2 surveys, one with parents, again, with kids under the age of 18 in the home, and also with pastors who have family ministry responsibilities. So that's our broad study and the people that we talk to. So in setting that out, could you just remind me what the rest of your question was?
Well, it just that's a very good start. Why don't we let Lindsay see if she can answer the question if she remembers what it was?
I think it was what stood out, what was something good and what was
Yes.
something challenging, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to say because a lot of practices and beliefs have their own contextual outworkings in each family. But I think one thing that was encouraging to me is we saw a lot of parents want to have an explanation for the faith that they had. So a lot of them said, you know, I was, what was required of me as a child was this unquestioning obedience to what my parents said I had to do. And so a lot of them took that and said, I want to be able to provide explanations for my children and to talk about faith rather than just demand certain behaviors. So I think this is something that is good. Something that was challenging, however, was often this push to want to maybe live out the faith more than just assume certain faithful behaviors, often meant that parents swung the pendulum to just providing an example, and they didn't want to push beliefs on their children. And so this idea to provide explanation can sometimes be pushed to an extreme where they just decided to model faithful behaviors, but actually not explain what was happening. So there was this desire for a middle ground, but we saw this desire for not to want to put pressure on children to follow Christianity or to believe the tenets of the Christian faith. And so a parent would model their beliefs, but they wouldn't explain or push that onto their children in the name of choice and wanting to offer their children the choice to pick up the faith or not.
You bring up I'll call this an interdisciplinary thought, which is the whole question of what is being considered in amongst a number of things, from exponential to a number of other groups that are saying we need to get back to evangelism, which is proclamation, more than evangelism, which is merely look at me, this is imitate me or whatever. How do you, a number of the parents that you talked with also said that they didn't want to be like their parents. Now, Rick, I'm going to throw this back to you. They talked about, I don't want to be like my parents. I don't want to parent like my parents. And so maybe they've gone to the model versus the proclamation. Rick, what did you see about that? What struck you when you heard that or saw that coming out of the study?
So there is a bit of a generational break in terms of parents' willingness to learn from their parents. But a lot of this goes back, as Lindsay said, to the idea that their parents didn't give them choice and they didn't give them explanation.
Right.
So these are the breaks. So there is a bit of a pendulum shift, but I think it's important to understand culturally kind of what's going on here. And in our chapter on choice, we talk a little bit about Charles Taylor's, he's a Canadian philosopher, his idea of the authentic self. And so this is what Charles says. He says that there are two me's in the way that we understand each other now. So he goes back to Rousseau, who says that we are born good until society makes us bad. So this is kind of the opposite of what Christianity teaches, right? We teach that that we have a sinful nature that's a result of the fall, and that in order to become good, we need Christ's righteousness, not our own. It comes through salvation. And so there's these two me's. And so the quest in life then becomes to discover who I am. And then this is the authentic self. And then if society makes us bad, then there's this understanding that your pastor, your parents, your society, everyone, they're all trying to push an identity on you. And that identity that they're pushing on you, this is them actively trying to make you bad. And bad in the sense that that they're pushing an identity on you that makes you different than your true authentic self that is deep down inside. And so there is this belief that there's a true authentic self that only I can find. So there's the uniqueness of the discovery, and that when they find that authentic self, that it will be unique. And so what this means is that if I look deep down inside and see a faith that looks like yours, then I found your faith, not mine. And because my faith is a deep part of who I am, if I look deep down inside and find a faith that looks like yours, then I haven't found myself. And parents sort of feel this, and they feel the pressure that comes with this anthropology, this way of looking at ourselves. They feel that if they are to push a common faith on their children, what they're actually doing is preventing their children from finding themselves. And Charles Taylor says that that is moral salvation. I'm putting that in air quotes for those who are listening. That is moral salvation in a sort of our culture's self-understanding. And because of this is where I think a lot of the reluctance comes from to teach and directly pass on the faith to your children. Because although we may not explain it in the way that I've explained it, and I could go to all kinds of examples from movies and stuff to kind of make that concrete, but they feel like they're doing something bad if they push the Christian faith on their children. I'm using this pushing language. So parents they would talk about how they're happy to expose their kids to Christianity in the same way that they would have their kids exposed to other religions at school or in other contexts. But exposure puts Christianity out there as a choice for their kids to choose. And remember, the gift is the gift of choice and the range of choices. The gift is not the gift of faith per se. The parents that we talk to, by and large, would be happy if their kids did choose Christianity, but that becomes a good choice because their kids chose it, not because Jesus is good in of himself.
Okay, I've heard this many times over in my life, as to how we look at the faith and what our faith is. The idea of choice becoming almost supreme. Okay, back to Lindsay for a second here. So, who's God in the midst of all this?
God is God.
It
depends. No,
self, but
no, I know. So God becomes among one of the choices, I think, and it's not about. It's really about who the authority is, I think. Is God the authority over our lives, or am I the authority to choose what I want? And so I think it's a battle over who is presenting what is good. Does God say this is good, or do I say, what I choose is good? And so this is the big tension. I think there's a difference in where we are looking for our this authoritative voice and presence, and it's not going to be from the Bible. It's not going to be from God's own word. That means it changes the role of pastors. It changes the role of parents, because I am now my own authority to decide what is good for myself. And that just dramatically changes how we think about and do faith formation, because we have to sort of take that authority away, which is one of the biggest no-nos in our culture.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, go ahead, Rick.
I think it's important to realize, I think of some of our listeners might be going, ooh, I shouldn't be the authority. Somebody else should be the authority, or God should be the authority. Yeah. I think it's important to realize where this is coming from, right? When Rousseau talked about how we are good until society made us bad, everybody out in society was somebody who abused authority, right? And what he was looking for is a way to deal with abuse of authority. And the reason that the idea that that the Bible, that God, that the church, why we kind of say, ooh, we're just a little bit nervous about that being an authority, is because in our heart of hearts, we don't believe that those authorities can be good, because we have heard over and over again stories of how they have abused power. And really, this is part of what's at the root of how we parent and how we feel that we need to reconfigure what our parenting is, because we don't believe ultimately that we could trust anyone to have authority in our lives. And that goes to God too.
Yeah. And I mean, I still remember my kids 5, 6 years old saying, "You're not the boss of me." Well, then who is the boss? Well, I'm the boss of me. So it's sort of that. And we live, okay, I'm gonna run a little rant here, but we live in a society that where abuse has become a huge word, and used almost like a stick to ward off everybody as you're abusing me. Is there a point at which then in this kind of society we can stand up as parents and say, this is truth and you should believe it?
I think that truth is always received in a context.
Yes.
So we assert that the Bible is true, that the gospel is true, that Jesus is true. But that will only be heard in a context where we are faithfully loving our children and our neighbors. And so when we stand up and say these things are true, and it's not in accord with what people are experiencing, then as they experience it as something bad.
Right.
And that's the danger. To some extent, we have magnified in our culture the stories of the faithlessness of the people who preach the gospel. Now, that's not to diminish that. We need to confess and seek an apology. We have to apologize for our sins, but we also minimize the many constant acts of faithfulness in families and in churches that go on and on, right? Where do you see in our culture the faithful father or mother who day in, day out lovingly cares for their children and family and sacrifices for them? So we both need to tell those stories, but we have to pay attention to the context in which we're proclaiming the good news and the truth of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you've opened up a whole, or we have opened up a whole philosophical besides practical research base here that I love. And I'm going to chase a few rabbit holes here and just ask. Okay, the first question. The study was done based on parents being evangelical or experts having an evangelical background. But what did that sort of look like? Who were they? Lindsay, maybe you can, I see you're nodding. Maybe you can help me a little bit.
It's a good question. So Rick described in the beginning that we had a few different samples. So we had these ministry experts, and these were actually people nominated by our research partnership. And they were sort of meant to represent the body of expertise on the topic as it pertains to evangelicals in Canada, according to the group that we were representing and doing research for. And then we recruited parents for interviews, and we recruited through 2 channels, one through a polling company, and then from our own partnership networks to interview. And we always start with these interviews because until we understand people's lived experiences, we actually don't know what to ask on a survey, for example. So, and then for interviews, we always set quotas as well so that we have representation from a variety of regions across Canada, ethnicities, we have moms, we have dads, and then the 2 official languages are represented in Canada as well. But these quotas end up being harder to control with a survey.
Yeah.
So, and especially when we use something called a referral sample, which was the methodology that we used. So I can get into that a little bit about why that was so, but a referral sample means that when you recruit the people to take part in your survey, you tend to attract people who care most about the topic that you are researching.
Exactly.
So in our case, that means we did get a group of what we called a fairly devout group of parents, based on what they told us about their religious practices. It also meant that we had 75% of respondents were mothers. So it also indicates that moms tend to be more interested in this topic as well. But I would say in our report, we're quite clear about when our observations are coming from ministry expert or parent interview samples, and then when we're talking about the survey sample. But even though it's a fairly devout group of respondents, we still saw these themes on choice. We still saw these themes about exposure. And so it does give us an indication that even among what we would call maybe some of the most devout groups, we're still seeing some of these cultural themes come into these groups of respondents.
Yeah, no question about that. Now, here's the, and maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, but it sounded like, as I read through the report, that we're glad to have experts, but parents figured they were the experts. So they're quite a contrast between what experts thought parents should be doing and what parents figured we're doing really well because we're the experts. Can you speak to that, or am I missing that? Am I misinterpreting that? Either one of you? And
I think to a degree, parents are experts in their own children. I think what's interesting though is where they look to for help. So they don't necessarily look to the experts that they have available, maybe at church, but they will look to resources that they can sort of gather and curate on their own. So that we saw that they said actually they ranked friends as highest, and friends are great. I'm all about having friendships. But they might not be able to challenge you or to give you insight that an expert or even just somebody who's a little bit older and a little bit farther along in their life can give you. They were also looking to resources like podcasts and books and social media. And again, these can be from Christians, these can be from experts. What's interesting about these kinds of resources, however, these experts that parents are consulting, is that you can close the book, you can turn it off if you don't like what you hear. So the expert advice that is being sought by parents is not happening in the context of relationships, and they're losing out on maybe some of that accountability that can happen in the context of somebody who knows you and loves you and can speak into your life and possibly challenge you.
And we lose benefit of intergenerational context, right? We're very good at looking back a couple generations before and saying, I can't believe that they parented that way, right?
Amen.
But what we don't realize is that someone's going to come along a couple generations afterwards and look at us and say, I can't believe they parented that way. And some of those rough edges in our parenting might be taken off with the with another generation's perspective. And because of some of the things that we talked about earlier, we are less willing to learn from our parents about parenting.
So you have a bunch of ministry partners, and I'm hoping to talk to some of them in this next week or two. How will this affect what they do in regards to parenting, helping parents and children's ministry and whatever? I'll throw that out. I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see what it's.
Okay, I
could agree. We're working that out in conversations now as we sort of reflect on the findings, and I think there may be some cooperative work done in the future. I would hope that one of the things that would come out of this, for example, around digital media. So, for example, parents told us that one of the big things they tried to do was control their children's digital media content. And the principal way that they did that was by imposing age-appropriate daily time limits on access to the internet. One of the real aha moments that we had was to realize that parents are doing this, but they're not actually consuming that digital media that their kids are consuming themselves, so that they know what it is, so that they can talk with their kids about it. Rather, they're saying you can have this certain amount of time, but then there's this large space of their kids' lives where they don't know who their associates are. So you don't know who they're interacting with. They don't know what their kids are consuming. So you actually can't parent them about that material. And so the influence, we always like to say that parents have the largest influence in their kids' lives, and they do, but to the extent that they have this unknown section of their lives there, our parenting influence is shrinking. And the solution to that, I don't know what the solution to that is going to be, but what I do know is that individually, parents, myself included, are not doing a good job with that. And this is going to be, if there are solutions, we're going to have to figure out how to do this together, to do this as churches.
Okay, Lindsay, just before you go back, I'm just going to pop in with a quick observation. Yesterday, I was listening to an interview with a social media influencer who was dealing with parenting, and he said basically the biggest problem is that now anybody and everybody can set up their own app on parenting. They can do whatever. It's a question of credibility and the ability to know what you need to listen to. And so in a sense, reflecting that even if you know what people are saying, is it right or is it wrong? And is it misinformation? Is it disinformation? So in one sense, I hear you saying we have to dig deeper to understand what our kids are watching, hearing, but also dig deeper to understand when it's misinformation. Okay, that's my rant.
But if I could just follow up on that.
Yeah.
So yes, we need to dig deeper, but the problem that we're all having is not that we don't know that we need to dig deeper. It's that we don't have the stamina with our shovels to keep digging.
Oh, okay.
And this is the problem, that the scale of the digital media content outstrips us. And that's the problem. And that means that we actually do less parenting. And that's the problem that we have to solve.
Okay, Lindsay, that's a huge, Rick, that's a huge question. Okay, Lindsay, do you have anything you want to add?
I mean, I would love to see the church renewed as a resource for parents. I would love to see them really turning to the church to find a community, both intergenerational and peer community, to talk about the things that they're struggling with, to talk about their observations, to really try to live out their faith with a community of support that will love them and know them and speak into their lives, and also speak into their children's lives. So there's a whole chapter on the church's role in faith formation. And I would just love to see that as a place where parents feel like they are part of a body of support and of resources, and that can both model and teach and develop the next generation of Christians.
Yeah, I read through that section, and in some ways, I'm glad that the church is there and they want to support it, and that's obvious. But also, it's almost depressing how little interaction there seemed to be, or authoritative interaction, maybe it'd be even a better way to put it, that happens between the church and a number of parents. Just okay. So many questions, but like our time's about up, guys. Sorry. I'm gonna leave it open to you for a minute or two. Anything that you'd like to say, Rick and Lindsay, that you could pass on to, and this is a small church ministry podcast. What would you say to small churches in regards to helping parents and children, bringing up children, and faith formation? We'll start with you, Lindsay, and then we'll finish off with Rick here.
Sure. I just think the small church is really positioned to offer that intergenerational piece that seems to be missing. Oftentimes there aren't enough volunteers to have a dedicated nursery or to have those really age segregated ministries. And so there's opportunity to learn together in a community and to be exposed to a whole host of generations in the small church. And I think that is invaluable for families and something that the small church is uniquely positioned to offer.
Yeah, I think Lindsay said that really well. Small churches do have these relationships. Something we learned in the renegotiating faith study is just the importance of walking with people even after they may have left your church.
Mm-hmm.
It would just encourage small churches to do that when they go away to university or college or move for a job. Stay in touch, because often you're the Christian influences in their lives, and when they move, it takes them a while to get settled, and you can still be their connection into a church, into a community of believers.
Well, thank you. This has been very informative, both for myself as a parent and now as a grandparent, working with that whole area. Faith formation is very important. And so I thank you both very much for joining us today on our podcast.